Hi, welcome back to the Unstuck podcast. I'm Heather,
Cameron.
and we're going to talk today about arguing, fighting, confrontation inside of marriage and whether that's a good thing or not. We actually weren't even planning to record, but we were starting to have a conversation and we're like, we should just turn the camera on. So we'll see if this makes it or not. But let's give a little backstory. Well, we had a little bit of an argument this morning, which started conversation about this topic in general. Is trying to rush, get out of the house, do some food prep so we have meals for the day, make sure kids are set up with everything. And Cameron didn't understand that I was running a little behind and would really have liked some help and was off doing another project that needed to get done. And then I walked in and got upset. And anyway, we had a bit of a confrontation. And I think those are never pleasant, but I think we've done a lot of work to get to the point where we handled it the way that we did, or there was some unpleasantness, even raised voices, but then walking away, taking a breath, and then coming back and regrouping and discussing and working through it, apologizing, all of those things. And so this led to our thoughts about what it means to argue in marriage. And we were both just remarking that throughout our lives, we've had people that we've known, friends of ours, some just acquaintances that are talking and expressing that either they don't fight in their marriage ever, or they're aspiring to never fight in their marriage. I think that's what you were talking about, somebody that you knew
Yeah.
a couple decades ago that was kind of saying, my parents never fight and that's my aspiration. And
Not in so many words, but basically that was the
something
gist
like
of it.
that.
Yes.
And then I think you were saying that you would remember there being some kind of conflict later after they married.
It seemed like there was conflict later. Yes.
And this is just speculation because acquaintance this was a conversation that was heard. I didn't hear it, but nothing that we know for sure. But so we just got stopped. We just started talking about, is fighting good? Is lack of conflict okay? Or is that optimal? And what our thoughts are on it. So do you want to say anything before I keep chattering on and on?
Sure. I think as we talk about this, I think it's really important whenever we're talking about these type of subjects, it's so easy to and we will point out other people that we know, not by name, but just things that we've heard in our lives and how we feel about it. But it's really important to recognize what it's doing for you. Whenever we're talking about these things, be it bitterness, be it honesty, be it the contention and things that we're talking about right now, it's really important, and I want to emphasize this always, is that you look where it's showing up for you, because I really feel it's the locus of control is yourself. And so when we're talking about this, if you see anything that rings true for yourself, find where you can fix it. And for others, fine. If you can observe it, that's great. And if there's a way that you can beneficially express it to someone, great too. But I don't expect change for someone else. I expect change for yourself.
Well, and this actually reminds me of a few things. We had a church conference last weekend, and one of the speakers asked, he said that we're actually really good at thinking that this doesn't apply to us, right? Because we've got it figured out. Yeah, that's good for somebody else. You may even know the person it would be good for, but we stop listening for ourselves, and that's one of our biggest downfalls, is when we assume that this isn't our problem, it's somebody else's. And so I think what you're saying is just inviting everybody to contemplate if there's something for them. And I think being the continuous student has a lot of power. You do learn and master things in this life, and I'm not saying don't do that. But if you always approach situations from, I have something to learn, even if it's about human nature and people, you will be a better off human being overall. And just asking yourself always the question, what about this applies to me? What lesson is there in this for me?
Right.
But so I guess let's talk about what the lesson in this is for us. We were in a meeting with our therapist last night, and we were talking about conflict. And we were telling him how we've actually always done we've definitely fought throughout our marriage, but we don't have like long periods of time where we become disgruntled and disconnected and like not talking to each other or not addressing the issue, and we've always been pretty good about it. And then he questioned us. He's like, well, let's dig into that. Like, I'm wondering if that's actually healthy or what's happening there. And I love that he questioned that, because I think what ends up happening sometimes is that to keep the peace, we don't really resolve things. We like, what's the right word? Capitulate? Is that the right word?
If you're giving something up, yeah,
Yeah.
capitulating.
So we capitulate to save the peace and so in our dynamic, I'm really like, I will kind of to a fault fight to the death for something I believe in. And Cameron is very much he likes to be a peacemaker, and is that the word you use?
I think peacemaker, balancer.
Yeah. And so will sometimes like sacrifice his own feelings um in order to preserve the peace, and then not and also I think you struggle a little bit with knowing how to express them adequately. So if you have
Right.
them, you don't know how to express them, but you also really want the peace, and it just kind of makes for a really interesting, like sometimes disastrous like all the ingredients can sometimes cause an explosion, right? So I think so on the flip side of this conversation and what we were talking about right before we turned the camera on is it really good to not ever fight or not have conflict? And it's interesting, like as I've seen people in my life, or those that I'm aware of that have talked about that, it's interesting that like later on you see some fruits of dissatisfaction or dysfunction or toxicity, whether like the marriage ends in divorce or other things are going on. And so that, we were talking about situations that we were aware of individuals that we know. And I'm like, I don't know that it's really healthy to not have confrontation. And I'm not talking about brutal fighting, like the bitter, nasty, angry, destructive things. But confrontation just means that you have a position, you have feelings, you have powerful feelings or convictions on something, and and somebody else in your life, and we're talking about spouses right now, so your spouse may have a completely different or opposite and conflicting viewpoint, and what do you do with that? So you can ignore it and just not talk about it. And I think that often happens to preserve the peace. Well, we're not fighting, so it's good, but are you actually connecting? Are you learning about each other? Are you learning how to compromise? And are you learning how to, marriage sacrifice is not a bad thing when you make a choice for the better good. When you have somebody in your life that you love and you respect, and they have a strong feeling and yours isn't as strong, and you're like, I want to support that person, so I'm going to sacrifice my beliefs in this way to help support this person. But when you're going outside of your own integrity and you're not standing up for things that are important to you and that you do value, I think it's just like it builds, it like festers after a while. And I think too, like some people that are trying, they don't want to discuss it or they avoid it. The other person might sense that that's what's happening, and it can cause even more frustration and anger to build up because they want the honest conversation. I think we want honest connection, honest dialogue, and we don't want the patched over pleasantness that.
Except we also want control, and I think that's where things get messy. We want
That's
to
true.
manipulate the situation. We want to, um, so, and it's more insidious than you think. I'm more of a peacemaker, balancer. I would manipulate the situation by trying to capitulate to you, or just try to get things smoothed over as quick as possible without resolving it, because that's what I think is. So something I want to talk about is that I think there's a lot of times we have a logic for something that doesn't actually play out as truth if you really analyze the fruits and results. And, this is one of those things. saying that you'll never have an argument sounds like a good goal, right? You should have a goal to never argue. You should have a
Especially when you
goal.
start like putting virtue in a religious, like
Sure.
religious couples, right, where peace
Yeah.
and reverent, all those things are so highly valued. Um, but I think we misunderstand
Yeah.
because it wasn't Christ didn't not he didn't just go whatever, like, oh, I love you, whatever. No, he confronted the individuals, he confronted the sinner, and not in a condemning, damning way, in a charitable, like hopeful, I forgive you, go and sin no more. He didn't condone the sins, but he loved them and gave them the opportunity to change and be better, and he invited and called them to do it. And that's confrontation.
Yes.
That's loving confrontation. And I think that's what we're talking about right now, because this morning, like, it wasn't terrible.
It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't
But
loving
it wasn't
confrontation.
loving confrontation. We slipped into our me first, and I triggered that out of you.
I call it nasty town when it stops being a conversation and it starts turning into just blaming and fault finding and nasty names and bringing up old things and all sorts of stuff.
But we
We didn't get that far, but
I wouldn't call that nasty town. I think it was on the road to nasty
it was on the
town.
road.
If we didn't like back up and
Right.
and do the things that we know to do.
It had a possibility.
Yeah.
Luckily, we both kind of saw it coming and just said, no, we don't want that.
And the thing, something that I've been like mulling over and thinking about, and it's a principle that I've thought about for years actually, but just recently I've been thinking even more, is that when you are in that kind of space where you're irrational and you're angry and you feel justified, you're victimized, any of those feelings, no matter what resolution you come to through the fighting or the communication that happens in that state, it could be the right solution. You could fight for and know what the right thing is to have happen, but in that energy and in that state, you're actually never going to get the result that you actually want, because it's coming from a place of anger, and it breeds more toxicity in the relationship that you're in. Coming at and finding that solution in a clear state with a clear mind, in an untriggered way, you'll have much better results. And so some people think, like, and I know this was me for a long time, that if I walk away, then I'm just like caving in, or I'm giving up,
or running away,
and I would think that more of you. Like, if you walked away, I'd be like, you're just running away from this, let's solve it. Because I'm kind of like, when there's a problem to be solved, I like to tackle it and get it done right away. I don't like it lingering. I just want to take care of it. But then I like hound for it, and it doesn't give you space to process and come out of it either. And so by taking that break, it really does. But it's the hardest break to do sometimes, because when you feel really justified, like the other person has done something wrong or hurtful and you didn't deserve it, it's a hard place to be, because you can convince yourself so well in those moments that you are completely in the right to say something, and you might be, but I guarantee you that what you say in that state will not be received the way that it will help to create the optimal outcome.
I think it's important never to confuse being correct with having the right. And I think that's where we get confused a lot. We'll be correct on something, and then we'll give ourselves license for bitterness or something because we're correct. And so that means we have the right to do something. We'll insert stewardship or dominion in a place where it doesn't have to be or can't. But yeah, what would be a better way to okay, Heather, so what would you say would be the best way to fight, to argue, to contend?
The optimal way, and this is not usually how it pops up, right? Because you don't usually go, I'm going to go argue with somebody right now. Usually it's like a conversation that starts out fine, and or you're like, we're surprised. Like this morning, I walked in and I was needing help and you were doing something else and you weren't even fully dressed yet. And I just like immediately but I wasn't walking in the room to go fight with you. It took me by surprise, right? So a lot of the time, arguments, most of the time, I would say we're not knowing they're going to happen. They kind of spring up on us.
I think you put out a good point there. I think a lot of times an argument happens from an invisible contract that maybe wasn't explicit,
Sure.
or the person is just genuinely not following the contract.
Well, and I think there was confusion on the contract in our situation this morning because we had been talking about how I needed a little bit of extra help in the mornings to get ready, and then because I didn't specifically ask for it, I thought our previous conversations meant you understood that, and then I felt immediately like, well, he doesn't care. His promises don't mean anything, and I just let that victim mentality like take over instead of like taking a moment to myself and just going, okay, does Cameron love me? I know he loves me. I have all this evidence that he loves me and he cares and he's concerned about my well-being. What's actually going on? And if I had just like left the room and not said anything, and I think this is where the ideal thing comes out. Like I feel those emotions, but before I open my mouth, if I just take a look at the situation and go, okay, I'm going to take a minute to reflect, and then just say like, do I really have enough evidence that this thing that I'm accusing him of, that you just don't care, are you really going to change, blah blah blah, all those things that I'm feeling hard feelings for in the moment. um like, is that actually true? Do I really think that that's true? And outside of it, because we're outside of the moment right now, I'm like, well, of course not. Like, do I think sometimes you might not um see it as well as I'd like you to? Sure. But are you trying to do that? Is that something like you're sitting there willfully trying to say, I don't care,
Yeah.
she deserves to be, late and busy
I
and
think
whatever?
what you're glomming onto, I think if there's multiple possibilities of how someone's acting, or how someone could be treating you or something like that, how you could take it. If there's multiple possibilities, pick the best one. There's no reason to pick the worst one until you actually have more information.
But in order to do that, you got to have a clear head. And so removing yourself from the toxic
Right.
situation, I think, is the ideal step.
Right.
And doing that is hard. Like I said, like you are gonna fight yourself to stay there because
So I
no, if I
think,
could just communicate this, he'll see it, and it never works. It never works.
yeah. So I think what you're saying, if I was summarizing it, if you're starting to see red, give yourself a minute to pull back in the rationality, and to collect your
And
thoughts.
I would say a helpful tool, especially like with somebody that you love, right? Sometimes like, in a work situation where there's someone that just rubs you the wrong way all the time, and you don't really have like a loving feeling towards them, it might be harder to do this, but like take a look at that person and say like, how can I fight for their side? Because I love them and I know they love me, so how could they be seeing this? Like try and find the evidence of the way that,
Well, and I think you're getting to a next point that I was kind of interested in talking about. I really feel like when you remove the personal attack that you might feel from the situation, and then you look at, but you can address the fact that this might be affecting the marriage. So there's you, me, and marriage in between, and we affect each other by how we affect the relationship of marriage, but we can keep ourselves separate from how we're affecting it if it's negative, especially by looking at it as a project like that. And then we can,
looking at marriage as a project.
yeah, well, looking at it as the thing we're trying to build is marriage.
Yeah.
You're not building me. I'm
Yes.
building me. But
I
we are
can't
building
build
marriage.
you,
Correct.
but I can build a marriage that helps you build you.
Correct. And so then I think once you have that in mind, you can then treat the argument. You can come to the confrontation. Let's call it confrontation instead of argument. Confrontation with as a teammate, as someone who's working with you on this. And so then you can adjust the way you come at them with like, hey, I just need, what's going on? I feel like this is happening. You're getting information. Like if you're in a team, that's what you do. You're like, hey, if I'm playing baseball and the person keeps striking out and they're having troubles and I can see how I can help them, I would come to them, and it would be very deconstructive, bad constructive if I was just to say you're just dumb and you should just get the heck out of this team. But if I came to him and said, hey, I see that you're kind of holding your grip this way, and you could do a lot better. Why don't you try it like this? And
Fortunately, I think in sports, oftentimes people do it that way.
they do.
Like there's a lot of
But
shaming and a lot of yelling and a lot of like,
but I'm just saying, like, I think we can also point out the good stuff too, and say that that's also how you can bring it to a
Well,
relationship.
what motivates you? Is it somebody tearing you down, or is it somebody coming and recognizing your strengths and appreciating you for it, and constructively trying to help you do what you're doing better, um, with the objective to love and support you? That's hard when we're feeling like we need something from somebody else, and then to try and like it's like help them be better. Like it really can be self-serving, and I think that's one of the reasons why learning how to differentiate yourself from your spouse, like you own you and Cameron owns him. Okay, you own you, I own me, and and I would love for you to show up that way, but do I need it to feel okay? Do I need it to be successful and to have a good morning? Do I need it to be in a good mood? Like if I do, then
I own you.
then you own me, and then I don't get to choose my own happiness, and while it feels a little counter in intuitive to like the narrative that we have around relationships and marriage, like you make me so happy, like all of the pleasantries and the things that we see in movies, like it's just not real life. Like if you let somebody else own you, then you're at their whim. Like if what if something happened to Cameron and he like died tomorrow, or had a brain injury and
Capacity.
his capacity was diminished, or he became a different person because of it. Like if I allowed that to affect me the rest of my life, now I might feel sadness and grief and loss. I'm not saying you're unaffected, because when you love somebody, you care. Like what happens, you care. Like you can feel hurt, but to destroy your peace and have that kind of ownership over your feelings is not a healthy way to be.
Yeah.
And it's a lifelong. I don't know that anybody is ever completely 100% differentiated. I think it's just something we continue to work at and remind ourselves of every day, because it's so easy to slip into that victim mentality that something you did affects me and now I can't be happy.
Yeah. Well, and it's also it we don't recognize how empowering it feels to be a victim. We're going to touch on a lot of things. We've had other subjects before. So uh, a full podcast on victimhood and bitterness, and there's two different podcasts on those. But yeah, that we take a lot of fake empowerment, fake counterfeit empowerment with victimization, and when we say things like, "I do this because of this," I'm not happy because of this. Yeah, but and so getting back to confrontation in your relationships, I think that is first step. I'm in control of how I feel right now, and they might be damaging a relationship, the thing in between us, but they're not damaging me. I get to choose that, and I think if when you start there, it's easier to look at somebody as if they're your teammate. They're on your side. They're someone who can fight for you.
And that's a much happier way to look at it too, is to have somebody who is on your side, somebody that wants what's best for you and might just not know how to do that. Like they might just simply not know how to support you, and you know perfectly that you're not supported. And here's a funny thing too, like I have been asked for like what can I do to help, and I'm like, I don't know, I just need help. Like, and I don't even know sometimes. And so like if you don't know, how are they supposed to know? And so question, like, do you even know what you want?
And that's a really good point to wrap this up with, because our therapist did make a very good point, and that you should also, so a owning your yourself and your emotions, and then secondly, if you don't, so for instance, if Heather says like, look, which shoes look better, this or that one, and I don't care, and they both seem fine to me, I have learned to have an opinion, to pick something. And so when it comes to what do you want, you should, if you're not positive in a moment, go ahead and make a decision on what you want. And what will happen is then you can communicate that to your partner. And I think it surprises you how often they're willing to fight for that for you.
I'm wanting to, they just don't know what to do.
Right. If they don't know what it is, then it just becomes an amorphous thing that's impossible to help you with.
And like for women, and this was part of the talk that was given at the conference last weekend, was like how many times do men, and this is stereotypical, so it could be either way, but like how many times do husbands come in and they try to get the baby dressed for church, or do the dishes, or put something away, or go grocery shopping, and then because it's not done the exact way that you wanted it and that you would have preferred, there's criticism, and I might as well just do it myself, and all these things. And so we want the help, but we also have to be willing to be grateful for the help that's offered, and to lovingly mentor and help them understand what you actually need, instead of berating and belittling. And the comment that was made at the conference was that I think he had been visiting with one of these husbands, and the wife had been in to see, like, I guess he was a bishop at the time or something, and the wife had been in to see him, explaining that my husband doesn't help and doesn't support me, all those things. And then he asked him about it. He's like, yeah, I know why she says that. He's like, I've just given up because I can never do it right. So let her do it. And I'm like, oh, that's so sad, because it's not like he didn't want to help. And she was just seeing how he couldn't do it the right way. And like, I don't even know, and I'm speaking for myself here, but I really think so much of the time we just have this big long list, and we know we need help, but we don't know what to ask for. We don't know how to ask for help. And so when it's given, I just like, I thought it was such a profound thing that I hadn't really contemplated very much before. When help is given, and when there's an effort given, like, be grateful, recognize it, and if it's not how you needed it, get clear on what you need, and then like work with them. I think more than most of the time, they're wanting to, if they're gonna do something, they'd rather it be what you want, not something that you don't want. Otherwise, why do it at all?
Right.
So anyway,
So I'd like to do a quick wrap
yeah,
up.
yeah.
I feel like, just to say things we covered, and I hope, and I'm saying this in the most beneficial way, I promise you. I hope you have good confrontations. I hope you do. It'll strengthen you as a person. It'll strengthen the people you're with, and by strengthening people around you through healthy confrontations, through healthy ways to resolve, and those things, you will have a much stronger and better life. And anytime you can help someone be better, it'll help you as well. And so covering the things we talked about real briefly. No fighting is not good. It doesn't mean it's bad either. But if you're not having
I would say
beneficial
fighting
confrontation,
is better than no confrontation, or like you just don't,
yeah.
you ignore.
So instead of arguments and fighting, confrontation is probably the best way to look at it. No confrontation is not good. And also, when you start, it really helps to work on differentiating yourself, separating yourself from the need of how someone shows up, and then also approaching it in a way that is like a teammate, and and having a win state that you can state. Make what you want available.
And be humble when you talk. Listen to what they're saying. Listen to understand. Don't listen to refute, or to come back and to prove wrong, because it's that mutual sacrifice and mutual, like, working together to create, like you're talking about before. There's you, and there's him, and then there's the marriage. And so what you're working on is this, and you being individual, and
Thank you
them
for
being
pointing that out.
individual.
Thank you for pointing that. Yeah, genuinely listening really is like probably the biggest thing.
It's not easy,
Yes.
but it's worth it. All right. Thanks for joining. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And also, if you have a question, there's the anonymous form. There's a Google form link that is below in the description. So use that. Ask us any questions that you might have. We'd love to hear your thoughts and know how we can help support you. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.